Picture this. For over 70 years, America has been the undisputed king of global trade. The dollar was the world's currency. American companies dominated markets, and international trade flowed through systems designed in Washington. But something fundamental has shifted. In 2024, the United States recorded a staggering $295 billion trade deficit with China alone. Countries are actively seeking alternatives to the dollar, and new trade blocs are forming without American involvement. The question isn't whether America's grip on global trade is loosening. It's how fast it's happening and what comes next. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most significant economic shifts of our lifetime. We'll explore how America built its trade empire, identify the cracks that are appearing, examine the rising challenges, and understand what this means for the future of global commerce. From the rise of BRICS nations to the emergence of alternative payment systems, from regional trade agreements that exclude the U.S. to the growing momentum of de-dollarization, the economic landscape is transforming before our eyes. This isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about power, influence, and the reshaping of global relationships that will affect every aspect of international politics and economics for decades to come. So buckle up as we unpack why the world's largest economy is finding itself increasingly sidelined in the very trade system it once dominated completely. Please do well to like, share, and subscribe as you listen. All right. To understand America's current predicament, we need to go back to the end of World War II. In 1944, representatives from 44 nations gathered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to rebuild the global financial system. What emerged was a framework that placed the United States at the center of world trade. The dollar became the global reserve currency, backed by gold and American economic might. This wasn't just convenient, it was revolutionary. Countries needed dollars to buy oil, to trade with each other, and to hold as reserves. America essentially became the world's banker, printing the currency that everyone else needed. By the 1970s, even after the gold standard ended, dollar dominance persisted through petrodollar agreements and the sheer size of the American economy. For decades, this system worked brilliantly for the United States. American companies had preferential access to global markets, U.S. banks facilitated international transactions, and American economic policies rippled across the world. The World Trade Organization, established in 1995, largely reflected American interests and free trade ideology. By 2000, the U.S. controlled roughly 25% of global GDP and was the largest trading nation. American multinationals like Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and Microsoft became household names worldwide. The dollar accounted for nearly 60% of global foreign exchange reserves. This dominance created what economists call exorbitant privilege, the ability to borrow cheaply, run trade deficits without immediate consequences, and essentially export inflation to other countries. But this golden age of American trade hegemony contained the seeds of its own transformation. The first major crack appeared with China's entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001. What seemed like a victory for American-led globalization quickly became something else entirely. China didn't just join the global trading system, it systematically exploited it. Cheap labor, government subsidies, and strategic currency manipulation turned China into the world's factory almost overnight. Between 2001 and 2018, America's trade deficit with China exploded from $83 billion to over $400 billion annually. Manufacturing jobs that had sustained American middle-class communities for generations disappeared, relocated to Chinese factories. By 2010, China had become the world's largest exporter, a title America had held for decades. Meanwhile, the 2008 financial crisis exposed fundamental weaknesses in the American economic model. As Wall Street melted down, countries began questioning whether the dollar-dominated system was truly stable. China started discussing alternatives to dollar dependency. Russia began accumulating gold reserves instead of dollars. Even traditional allies express concerns about America's fiscal responsibility and the risks of dollar reliance. The crisis marked a psychological turning point. For the first time since World War II, the American economic model looked vulnerable, and alternative systems seemed worth considering. China's rapid recovery from the crisis, powered by massive infrastructure spending, contrasted sharply with America's sluggish rebound. By 2012, China was actively promoting its currency, the renminbi, for international trade. Trade wars under both Obama and Trump administrations, while aimed at addressing these imbalances, paradoxically accelerated the search for dollar alternatives and weakened America's reputation as a reliable trading partner. The past decade has witnessed an acceleration of trends that threaten American trade supremacy. In 2020, 15 Asian countries signed the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, creating the world's largest trade bloc, notably without the United States. This agreement covers roughly 30% of global GDP and population, creating new trade routes and relationships that bypass American influence. China has become the largest trading partner for over 120 countries, compared to fewer than 80 for the United States. The Belt and Road Initiative, China's massive infrastructure project, has connected Asia, Africa, and Europe through Chinese-financed ports, railways, and highways. These aren't just transportation links, they're economic arteries that channel trade toward Beijing rather than Washington. Meanwhile, technology has become a new battleground. American sanctions on Chinese companies like Huawei and attempts to restrict semiconductor access have pushed China to develop independent technology ecosystems. What was intended to maintain American technological dominance has instead created parallel systems that don't rely on American components or standards. The most dramatic shift involves currency arrangements. In 2024, BRICS expanded to include Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates, representing over 40% of global population and a growing share of world GDP. These nations are actively developing alternatives to dollar-based payment systems. Russia and China now conduct substantial bilateral trade in their own currencies. India has negotiated rupee-based trade agreements with several countries. Even oil transactions, historically denominated in dollars through petrodollar agreements, are increasingly conducted in alternative currencies as major oil producers join BRICS and diversify away from dollar dependence. The numbers tell a stark story of America's declining trade position. In 2024, the U.S. goods trade deficit reached $295 billion with China alone, representing a 5.8% increase from the previous year. Overall, America imports significantly more than it exports, running persistent trade deficits that reflect fundamental structural changes in the global economy. Manufacturing, once the backbone of American exports, has been systematically relocated overseas. Today, services account for a larger share of American exports, but services trade alone cannot offset massive goods deficits. The technological landscape reveals similar challenges. While American companies like Apple and Google remain dominant in consumer technologies, critical infrastructure technologies increasingly come from Chinese companies. Solar panels, wind turbines, electric vehicle batteries, and telecommunications equipment, the technologies that will power the next century, are primarily manufactured in China. American attempts to reshore manufacturing through subsidies and incentives have achieved limited success, partly because global supply chains have become too complex and interdependent to quickly reorganize. The dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has gradually declined from over 60% in 2000 to approximately 59% today. While this may seem modest, it represents hundreds of billions of dollars in reduced demand for American assets. More concerning for long-term American interests, alternative payment systems are rapidly developing. China's cross-border interbank payment system processes increasing volumes of international transactions. Russia's SPFS system, created after 2014 sanctions, now connects hundreds of financial institutions. These systems reduce reliance on SWIFT, the Belgium-based network that has been a cornerstone of American financial influence. Several key factors are driving this transformation of global trade patterns. First, demographic and economic shifts have created new centers of growth and consumption. While American consumer markets remain important, the fastest-growing middle classes are in Asia and Africa. Companies increasingly prioritize access to these markets over traditional American relationships. Second, technology has democratized global commerce. Digital platforms, mobile payments, and logistics innovations allow countries to trade directly without American intermediaries. Small and medium-sized businesses in developing countries can now access global markets through platforms like Alibaba, reducing dependence on American companies and systems. Third, geopolitical tensions have accelerated de-dollarization efforts. American use of economic sanctions as a foreign policy tool has convinced many countries that dollar dependence represents a strategic vulnerability. From Iran to Russia to Venezuela, sanctioned countries have developed workarounds that other nations study and sometimes adopt preemptively. Fourth, climate change is reshaping global trade patterns. As countries transition to renewable energy, traditional energy relationships are evolving. The petrodollar system, which helped maintain dollar dominance for 50 years, becomes less relevant as oil's importance diminishes. Countries with abundant renewable energy resources, particularly in Asia and Africa, are becoming new centers of economic power. Fifth, generational change in leadership worldwide has reduced automatic deference to American economic models. Leaders who didn't experience the Cold War or benefit directly from American-led reconstruction are more willing to challenge existing systems and explore. The implications of America's declining trade dominance extend far beyond economics. Trade relationships have historically been instruments of political influence, and America's reduced economic leverage means diminished ability to shape global affairs. When China becomes a country's largest trading partner, Beijing's preferences on international issues carry more weight than Washington's. This shift is already visible in international organizations where American positions face increased opposition. Economically, the transition presents both challenges and opportunities for American businesses and consumers. On one hand, increased competition from Chinese and other foreign companies pressures American firms to innovate and improve efficiency. American consumers benefit from cheaper goods and improved technology resulting from global competition. On the other hand, persistent trade deficits contribute to job displacement in manufacturing regions, and reduced economic leverage may limit America's ability to negotiate favorable trade terms. For the dollar's role as global reserve currency, the implications are particularly significant. Reserve currency status provides enormous economic advantages, including the ability to finance government deficits cheaply and the power to impose economic sanctions effectively. As alternatives develop and gain acceptance, these advantages may gradually erode. However, creating viable alternatives to the dollar remains challenging. Despite growing interest in alternative currencies and payment systems, the dollar's network effects, liquidity advantages, and institutional support provide significant momentum. The process of currency transition typically occurs over decades rather than years, giving American policymakers time to respond if they choose effective strategies. So what does the future hold for America's role in global trade? Several scenarios seem possible, each with different implications for American prosperity and influence. In the optimistic scenario, America adapts successfully to changing global conditions. This would involve significant investments in education, infrastructure, and technology to maintain competitive advantages in high-value industries. American companies could focus on innovation, design, and complex services while accepting that routine manufacturing will occur elsewhere. This model, similar to strategies pursued by countries like Germany and Japan, could maintain American prosperity while accepting reduced dominance. A more concerning scenario involves continued decline without successful adaptation. In this case, persistent trade deficits, reduced technological leadership, and diminished currency influence could create a self-reinforcing cycle of economic weakness. American living standards might stagnate while other countries prosper, leading to increased domestic political tensions and reduced international influence. A third possibility involves a managed transition toward a more multipolar global trading system. Rather than fighting to maintain unilateral dominance, America could work with partners to create new frameworks that accommodate multiple centers of economic power while protecting shared interests in open markets and fair competition. This approach would require significant diplomatic skill and domestic political support for compromise solutions. Perhaps most likely is a mixed outcome where America remains economically powerful but operates in a more competitive and constrained environment. The dollar might retain significant international role while sharing influence with other currencies. American companies would remain important global players while facing intensified competition from Chinese and other foreign rivals. The transformation of global trade patterns represents one of the most significant economic shifts in modern history. America's position as the unchallenged leader of international commerce, established after World War II and maintained for nearly 8 decades, is evolving into something more complex and competitive. This change reflects broader global developments, the rise of new economic powers, technological innovations that democratize international commerce, and shifting demographic patterns that create new centers of growth and consumption. For Americans, this transition requires honest assessment of both challenges and opportunities. The benefits of trade dominance, cheap financing, global influence, and preferential market access may diminish over time. However, competition also drives innovation, and American companies have historically thrived in competitive environments when supported by appropriate policies and investments. The key question isn't whether America can maintain absolute dominance. The global economy has become too large and complex for any single country to control completely. Instead, the question is whether America can adapt successfully to a more multipolar trading system, while maintaining its prosperity and core interests. Success will require investments in education, infrastructure, and technology. It will demand diplomatic strategies that build coalitions rather than attempting unilateral control. Most importantly, it will require domestic political unity around long-term economic strategies rather than short-term partisan conflicts. The world is watching how America responds to this challenge. The country that built the modern global trading system now faces the test of adapting to its evolution. How America navigates this transition will shape not only its own future prosperity, but the structure of international commerce for generations to come. The era of unchallenged American trade dominance may be ending, but the story of American economic influence is still being written. Thank you so much for listening. Please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel as we bring you good content like this.